All right, so we are on to chapter 13, almost the end here, and we are going to get into an important topic that we are calling here counter-cyclical macroeconomic policy. And so, really, the idea here is we've just got done thinking about business cycles. So we tried to understand, okay, what is a recession, what's an expansion, and how are those caused? What do they look like in our model of the economy? And they're caused by changes in labor demand. And so now the next natural question is, well, what, if anything, can we do from the policy perspective to counteract the effects of, let's say, a recession or inflation via an expansion? And that's what we're going to look at in this chapter. So we've got our learning objectives here, 5 of them, and just kind of a brief introduction to the topic. And the current time really, sort of writes this chapter for us, or at least motivates us for us. So the economy's been hit very hard during this recent coronavirus pandemic. And so we've seen all the reports of unemployment being really high, and the economy's doing really poorly right now. And so then the question then is, the federal government has responded and the Federal Reserve has responded in different ways. And so we want to ask, what is the motivation for these policies and to effectively evaluate whether or not these are going to be successful or not. So, we've got this CARES Act, the $2.2 trillion that was sent out, and that was, basically a transfer, right? So households received checks, $1,200 each, and potentially more if you had kids. And then there was lots of funding built in for various businesses to be able to get funding and to get loans. And there's talk of more small business lending programs available. So we want to think about, okay, what's the motivation for those things and what's going on there. And the Federal Reserve, on their side, we talked about what they're doing with their policy, changing their target interest rate. And they've cut that target interest rate as low as it can go right now to 0%. They're actually doing some other things that they hope have an impact. And so we want to ask, given these big changes that have happened, what impact should these have on the economy? And kind of look back in history and think about, have similar things been tried in the past? And if they were these successful? And what is the impact of these different policies? So that's going to be our goal here, is to get to the bottom of the better understanding of some of the changes that are happening in our world and the motivation behind them. And at least we'll have the ability to analyze these to determine their efficacy. Okay, so first learning objective is simply to define fiscal and monetary policy. And we're going to classify them as contractionary versus expansionary. And so this is pretty straightforward. So monetary policy is the central bank, and in our case, that's the Fed, or the Federal Reserve Bank. So the central bank changing interest rates and or the money supply. We'll kind of see how this works. Well, we have an idea, but we'll kind of review some of that. So they're changing interest rates and or the money supply to achieve a particular macroeconomic objective. So to achieve some macro objective. So really, monetary policy is the Federal Reserve Bank, and in the end, it's really going to be changing interest rates, which is the key part of monetary policy as it's conducted today. Monetary policy, we're thinking Fed, we're thinking interest rates. Fiscal policy is the government changing its spending and taxes, and or taxes. So that could be tax rebates to consumers, as we've seen recently. It could be changes to tax rates, and it could be additional government spending on goods and services. And so that is simply fiscal policy. So think fiscal policy, we're thinking the government and its spending and taxes. That defines the two different types of macroeconomic policies that we could see. And so we're going to first start with expansionary policy here, which we're going to use in recession. And we'll kind of go through these and define, when we use them and how we use them. And then we'll eventually work back in the models that we've developed before. So up next is expansionary policy and then contractionary.